Hi, everybody. Welcome to Try to Understand. I'm Maget. Our pronouns are he, him, his, and some other important identities that I hold are I'm native Chamorro to the island of Guam, and I'm a gay cis man. I am joined by my co-facilitator, Katrina.
Hi, I'm Katrina. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and some identities that are important to me are I'm mixed race, Filipino and German, and I'm bi, and I'm a cis woman. Yeah, also a panelist today, which is fun.
Today we'll be discussing mixed race experiences with our panelists. Panelists, if you're comfortable, will you please introduce yourselves with your names, pronouns, and other important identities you want to share? Afterwards, we will begin asking questions for our discussion. And can we go in the order of Kat, since she already went, and then Jayne and Sarah?
Hello, my name is Jayne. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. Some important identities that I hold is that I'm mixed race, Thai and Caucasian, and I'm a cisgender woman.
Hello, my name is Sarah. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I identify as mixed race, Japanese, and white, and I am also a cis woman.
Awesome, thank you. Let's begin today's try session. So, the first question we have is, what does APIDA mean to you?
For being honest, like before I started working at APAC, I didn't really know that APIDA was even a term that was ever used. So I think as far as like personal meanings, there's not like as much depth as like others might have with it. But I think like as I've started working here and like learning more, especially through Try, I think APIDA definitely means like a lot more as far as like the model minority myth and perpetual foreigner, and like just because we're technically considered like a minority doesn't mean that we're like not supposed to be heard, and like there's a lot of depth I feel like we're going to get into it today, but yeah.
I think for me, the APIDA identity holds a lot of different feelings, thoughts, emotions, and experiences. I think over the past 4 years, I've always been asked this question at APAC, and so I think my answers change every time depending on like those thoughts, feelings, and experiences that I have. And I feel like it's just like this big blob inside of me, but it's a big blob that I decide to embrace a lot of times. And so being someone who's mixed race, I really push away that white side of me and really just embrace who I am within that APIDA umbrella. And I really enjoy doing that and really like to share parts of that identity and talk about it, and only see myself from that perspective and not really the other side of me, I guess, or like both at the same times in some situations. But and also it's how I carry myself when I'm on campus or to other folks. I don't know, it's just like a mix of so many different thoughts, feelings, and a lot of things. So that blob.
For me personally, APIDA is like a personal definer. It ties a lot into that mixed race bit. I was always Japanese American growing up. And yeah, I didn't learn what APIDA, didn't even identify necessarily as like Asian American until I reached university. It was always Japanese American. And so I think APIDA itself comes with a lot of solidarity with a lot of other Asian APIDA identifying folks. And yeah, for me, it was always my dad grew up in Nebraska and my mom is from Japan. And that helped shape a lot of my childhood as far as what I ate, what I did in my free time, what sort of hobbies I found. Yeah.
Cool. Our next question is, what does your identity mean to you? What are parts of it that you love, and what are parts of it that you don't?
Yeah, so I would definitely say that my identity means a lot more to me, just because it's obviously what I've grown up with, what I'm familiar with. Um, I feel like I kind of got really lucky in the fact that my dad was like not only like not as not only like aware of his identity and like proud of like the cultural aspects of it, but like aware of the fact that he is white and his like identity is pretty much like oppressive towards my mom's. And so he's really open to that and super like wanting to call people out on it. And then with my mom, obviously like I was a lot closer to her side of the family. So when it comes to that question of like, oh, or do you identify like more this way or this way? I never really know what to say because if in all honesty it always changes. Like when I was younger, I identified more as like German and then now it's like more like Filipino and it's just sort of like a constant thing. And I would say that's something I don't really like about it because with that it comes with a lot of like appears to be like indecisiveness, which is a little ironic considering that I'm also bi, so it's like I can't make a decision. um, but it's I don't know. I would say like the part that I love about it though is just the fact that I do have two different cultures that I just get to like identify with. And yes, in one sense I am closer to my mom's side than my dad's, but like it's still like cultural aspects of it. Like I get like both, which I think is really cool.
This is a big question for me because like I have a lot of different experiences growing up of being Thai in Thailand or being Thai and then white in Thailand, and then the same thing being in America or in the United States. So like it's kind of difficult for me to like really like compact all the experience and things I've had with my identity. But definitely one thing that stands out to me is that growing up, it's always that, oh, I'm Thai. I'm I've always been Thai and I've always been perceived as Thai, I guess, even within my family. That whiteness doesn't really get acknowledged as much. It's more of like, oh yeah, like she's from Thailand. She grew up there and then she speaks Thai and she can do all these Thai things. And as much as I hate it sometimes when people kind of like make that assumption of me without really asking me like good questions or like meaningful things on like, hey, like um heard that you're like your mom's from there or things like that. Like it's just not the same. If you can get what I'm like trying to say, it's just not the same when people are like making those assumptions. And so whenever I hear that, like I get really annoyed. But then the other side of me is like, but yeah, I am this and I embrace all of this. And then kind of like what Sarah said, I felt that I do embrace a lot of my Thai side, whereas I consolidate a lot of my identity or form it through different Asian cultures as well, growing up, or different APIDA cultures, but never really that American side. It's always just, I don't know what that part is. I don't know what that part actually means. So for me, it's just like a bunch of different things and like a bunch of different feelings going about depending on like where I am. One thing that I do love is like the culture and being able to speak to different people um, who I can relate to, either within the PETA culture or the PETA umbrella, or just with people who are also Thai. I think it's always fun to like have those conversations with people and have conversations like this later on what it means to like be navigating through like multiracial identities.
Yeah, so personally, because I did grow up a lot, I grew up in the U.S. telling people a lot of times that I was Japanese, and anytime I go to Japan, I get to tell people that I'm American, and I think it's definitely like as I grow and developmentally and like learn more about myself and find more terminology to like describe myself, I know now, and I feel now more that I am mixed race. I'm not like Japanese or I'm not white. I am like the culmination of all of what my parents have brought to me through their different cultures. And that's, I mean, part of that too, which is interesting, is it's like I'm not Japanese when I'm in Japan, and I'm not white when I'm in the US. It's opposite that. So I guess one of the parts that I don't really like about my identity is, as a mixed race person, people are rarely like jumping to like point out our similarities. It's more how are we different, and how are you different from me? So that can be very othering, but it's like at the same time I'm very proud of who I am, and the shared cultures that bring me to this point. Yeah, I feel like I have more to say, but I definitely can't remember it. So that's all.
Oh, thank you for sharing, though. And so our next question is, what are your experiences with the model minority myth? And then, for those of you who may not know what the model minority myth is, the definition for it will be posted in the chat.
Yeah, so I would say, because I grew up in California where there's a lot of like diversity as far as like different identities go, but I definitely, it's kind of weird. I would say that I experienced it more when I was younger, like in elementary school, than I did like now. But I'm not really sure why that is, but I just remember when I was younger, like it was mainly my friends that were like, oh, you're Asian, like you're supposed to be smart and good at math and blah 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 blah, and like all this other stuff. But then it was weird because as I got older, it was like, oh, you're more what, you're like, you like look Asian but you act white. So then that was like more like middle school sort of thing. So I don't know if the model minority myth apply, I don't think that's part like applies to it, but it was kind of like I definitely experienced it more when I was younger. But it was a lot of like, I don't know, it was weird because I experience it and then I don't, and it depends on who I'm talking to, and it depends on if they see me as Asian, if they see me as white, or if they see me as mixed race, which is what I am. But yeah, I don't know. It's like, it's very like vague for me. Like it really just depends. And I honestly don't get it as much often, which is really good.
I think for me, I've got it the most in middle school, of being like, oh, like you're one of our Asian friends, like you must be really good at science and math and just overall good in school. And it was just that standard. This doesn't really apply, but I remember in middle school, I was in the United States. I'm living in California at that time. And my English teacher asked me to read this paragraph for our English class. And she asked me to read this excerpt from this story about a Burmese boy and his family. And I was like, I don't know why she picked me out of all the other students to read this, but that was just something like I took note of back then, of like, I know I told you that like my family's from Thailand, and during parent teacher meetings my dad talked to you about that, but that doesn't mean like I have to read a paragraph about someone who's not even from Thailand, but anywhere in Southeast Asia really. But I think with the model minority back then, I think it was more, I think like what Katrina was saying, it was more, it happened a lot more when I was in middle school and not really in high school, because I think by then I moved back to Thailand, and even within them, people were like, oh, like you're half white, so that's okay. It means that you're not actually that smart, which was a really weird experience, having been told that, oh yeah, like you're actually really smart, or like all this, like all these stereotypes being put on me. But then on the flip side, it's like, oh no, it's okay, you're inadequate because you're half white, kind of thing. And it's like, oh, I know I don't talk about that side of me that often, but I don't think you really had to go to that extent. But other than that, I don't think I've really had any big issues with the model minority myth within the United States, because I spent such a short amount of time there in middle school compared to now in college, which I didn't really experience it as much.
I grew up very, I was like a pretty smart kid. I don't like to think I'm smart anymore, even though I'm electrical engineer. Like obviously that led to that, but anyway, point is, I grew up really good at math and science and like really passionate about both of those things. And I definitely feel like, including through high school, like a lot of the model minority myth is often used against young Asian students as like an excusal for any hard work they put in. It's like, oh, you're not smart, you're Asian. Like, of course you get this. You're Asian. It's not that you tried hard or anything. You just get it. It's great, which feels awesome. It's you can never try hard or like be the best without like, oh, it's not that they're the best, it's just Asian, which kind of goes back to like the expectation of like having like a tiger mom, like, oh, it's not that the students are great and they're trying hard, it's that their parents are pushing them, which I thought was really ironic personally for me, because I was also very artistic, so when I told my parents I would be going to university to get a degree in engineering, my dad like my parents were like, are you sure you don't want to go be an artist, like go get a liberal arts degree? And I was like, what? This is a weird reversal from what's usually expected as a cultural norm. But I just remember as I was pursuing this in high school, I cannot remember the context or who said this to me. It must have been a recruiter or one of the advisors or something helping us get to like work towards getting into university, but it was just about how we had to get our extracurriculars and stuff. It wasn't enough to be smart because they have hundreds of smart Asian students going in, and that's not going to be enough. Like there's too many smart Asian kids going into math and engineering, so it doesn't matter. And it was like, oh, okay, like yeah, I guess all the Asian kids are super smart and they're getting into like engineering courses, and that means that even being smart, like that's like the default for all Asian kids, so it's not going to be enough. And that's just something I definitely remember as weird in high school. But yeah, I definitely I don't know, it's like a weird experience for me now in college. I don't have any people that outright like make racist remarks to me about being an Asian in engineering. But I think that's because it's balanced weirdly by me also being a woman in engineering, which just comes to like the weird intersections of my identity and like what's considered like an achievement for me as a representative for everybody in my gender or race versus just the conflict between those as an Asian women in engineering. So that's me. Yeah.
Thank you all for sharing. And you all mentioned this a bit earlier, and it plays into this myth. But what are your experiences with the perpetual foreigner myth? And again, if you don't know what this myth is, it'll be posted in the chat.
Yeah, so I feel like, just for context, my mom immigrated over to the US when she was 5 years old, and I feel like I've seen more of the perpetual foreigner myth through her rather than through me, mainly because the question of like, oh, where are you really from, only gets asked like when I'm around my mom for some reason, and I think it has to do with the fact that like, oh, since that's your daughter, she like must have been born here and you've like done so much in all of this, and like, I don't know, it's like I've gotten that question like a couple of times of like, oh, where are you really from? And I'm just like, well, my mom's from the Philippines, but my dad's white. And they're just like, oh, where's he? And like, they usually never ask like where he's from. Like that's never a thing, which is like, I feel like that adds to like the big issue. But yeah, I've definitely gotten a lot from my mom, and she gets like really annoyed by it because technically she wasn't even in the Philippines for like majority of her life. Like um she grew up in like New Jersey, and like that was like the big like her big like growing up like area, and there was a lot of her getting annoyed by it, and then eventually as I got older I would get annoyed by it, and I'm just like, stop. um but she would always just say New Jersey, and then if they would keep bugging, she'll be like, okay, well technically I got moved over here when I was 5 years old, if that's what you want to hear. But yeah, it's mainly see it through like other people than I do myself.
I think with my family experiences, I was just thinking about when I was younger and having moved from Thailand to the United States, and my family thinking that, oh, we're going to stay here until I probably go to college, but that didn't happen. I think back then, like, yeah, I would have said, yeah, I'm from Thailand because that's where I lived before I came. And as I grew older and coming to college and learning about these things, a part of me really does not want to say that I'm from Thailand sometimes, just because I feel like I'm adding onto that perpetual foreigner stereotype, because a part of me is American, I guess. Like, I do have the privileges of being a citizen here, but sometimes I feel like people around me and like other folks that I know sometimes forget that I have that, I guess, or that I am technically Thai American, because I've always just been seen as, oh, like you're Thai. But I think instead of like, where are you from, I get a lot of like, oh, your English is really good, and it's like, no shit. um, I'm half white. I grew up speaking English. My family's bilingual. I went to school where they taught English. If anything, my English is better than my Thai. So thank you for your unnecessary comment. I get that a lot with professors at CSU whenever I'm like, oh yeah, my family's from here. This is what happened, blah, 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 moving story. And then they're like, oh yeah, your English is really good. Yeah. No, thank you, Linda. I don't need that comment from you.
Yeah, I was born in Japan, and I do have dual citizenship as well, and I definitely agree with Jayne that, like, I feel like a lot as a kid when people ask me like that question, um, it was Japan, because I was well trained. People asked me that question enough, it's like I knew what they were asking, so it was easy to like jump to the final answer and skip all that in between, which is probably why I identified more as Japanese American, because that was, when people meet me and they ask me like, oh, what are you? It's like, I'm Japanese. And then like, that's it. So I say that. And then ironically, I don't know if you know this, but Sarah is the most popular name for US baby girls. Um, Both the year I was born and the year before and after I was born. So I went to school, even when I went to a private school and there was only 30 kids in my grade, there was probably 3 Sarahs every year, and there was at least like 30 when I went to high school. So I grew up a lot being identified as like Asian Sarah. Um, and I like to attribute part of the reason I have really long hair to that is, it's a better nickname to be called Sarah with the long hair, or like the 3-foot long hair, than it is Asian Sarah. So I definitely like flip flop between being called the two of those. So yeah, even when half the Sarahs are like white with long blonde hair, it's easy to like pick me out as the only Asian Sarah. So that was my identifier. So definitely like, yeah, that's all I have to say.
Thank you all for sharing. Our next question is, how has your identity made an impact on where you are now?
I would say that since I like am mixed, even though like I am mixed race, my mom would always make sure that I was never felt that I was excluded. And I would say that that helped a lot too, because a lot of my cousins are also mixed in like some way or another. Whether that be like with like another Asian identity or with like Puerto Rican or something like that. Um, so it was something that I was, once I like really grew up, I was comfortable with. And I remember like coming into CSU, my cousin who is also half white, she was like, okay, you need to find, if there's not like a Filipino like club or something, you need to find like a place with like Asian identities to hang out with, because like she was saying that it's like worth it and it's like really like a good thing. She was also bugging my mom about it the entire time. So the second I went to orientation, I remember, I think Jayne was there. Actually, you probably don't remember this, but you were making like, I think you were either making rice or tea in APAC, and my mom like dragged me in, and she's just like, I want my daughter to hang out here, like, and like all, she asked if it was a club, like the whole thing. and and then like from there, I like, Anthony was like really like welcoming and everything, which helped a lot. And I joined like peer mentor, which my mom was like stoked about. Um, but I would say that like as far as my identity making an impact, as far as like who I hang out with and who I like put myself around, I definitely have surround myself with people with like similar identities to me. And that was something that really started senior year of high school. I had like a lot of like Filipino friends, and like almost everyone in my group was like either bi or gay or something of the sort. And like I would say that like it's definitely changed like my personality and how aware I am of like certain issues within the community, because I definitely wasn't coming into APAC and coming into CSU. I would say that has to do a lot with like sheltered Southern California families. Like I wasn't really exposed to um, the issues that really are at hand and should be addressed. But yeah.
I think in my high school years, while living in Thailand, I think that's when I kind of like developed this awareness of what it means to be Asian American at that time. I think BuzzFeed videos were really popular back then, so I watched a bunch of those, and that's where I gathered a lot of like you don't ask people who are like Asian where are they really from in the United States and things like that. So that's when like I kind of really developed that sense. But then coming into CSU, it I was like educated and I learned a lot more about what it actually means and all these other things with the stereotypes, the myths, issues that impacts our community. And back then I just lost my thought. Back then it was, I think a lot of what or how I learned my identity was very shallow based. It wasn't really that deep because I had a lot of similar people and friends who also identified as being Thai mixed with some other European identity. And so a lot of it was just very shallow based in Thailand of like, oh, when you're mixed race, you're beautiful and you're good at everything. And that was basically the stereotype back then in high school. So it's just like very shallow, very like appearance based, very like, oh, you're like a pretty Thai because you look close to being a Westerner. Basically, you are westernized in some ways. And I didn't really think much applying to CSU. I think back then my mindset was just like, oh, I'm just going to go to college somewhere, and CSU was the easiest in terms of like family, finance, things like that. And I think I remember I looked into like information on CSU, and I saw the pie chart of what's the word, of the racial the percentage of like racial identities within CSU. And so back then I didn't know what 80% white meant. I was just happy that I saw, what was it, 2 or less than 2% Asian. And so to me, that's like, oh, that's cool. And then actually coming onto campus, I think that really made an impact on me of like, oh no, this is not what I intended to happen. This is not what I wanted to see. But then going into APAC, I remember for orientation too, my sister was very adamant about me finding the Asian Pacific American Cultural Center. Basically, it was what she read from the orientation pamphlet, and she was like, you have to go. And I was like, why? Just because I'm Asian doesn't mean I have to go. But I don't know why she was so adamant on that, but I'm glad she was. I actually did my research on CSU and APAC beforehand, so like I was just like very shy in general. But then she took me there, and then I was like, this is cool. I like this. And then after that, I think I've just spent so much of my time on there, time within APAC, and really just submerging myself into Asian American media, supporting anything that's Asian or Asian American in general, because I feel like that has been a big part of my, well, yeah, it's obviously a big part of my life. And so I want to continue submerging myself into that and not really paying attention to other things. Like if it's not APIDA or Asian like related, like I don't want to hear it, basically, when it comes to like movies, TV shows and things like that. Like I just really don't want to hear it. And I feel like that has made me become really stubborn in a sense with how like I view things and how like I want to like consume things. But yeah.
So I just remember like a year or two ago, my mom read an article about like the mixed experience in Japan, and she told me she was so happy that they had moved to America because the dynamics of being mixed in Japan are a lot different. It's a lot less common, and especially in a population that looks a lot more homogenous, and definitely tends to be culturally a bit more racist. And she was, it's weird because they're definitely othered, but also like more fetishized because Western is like the ideal for a lot of like looks and beauty and stuff. So I know she's really happy, and that definitely influenced their decision to move to America, even though it was more business based. My mom is like that. They're very business based, but they come with a lot of like other benefits as well, which includes how I was introduced to APAC, because I know my first time here was with my father, but my second time here, someone during one of the APAC was tabling, I think, in one of the ballrooms, or no, they weren't tabling, but our tour guide had talked about the cultural centers, and when she heard they had like an Asian Pacific American one, she was like, we should go check it out. And she dragged me and pulled me into the office just like Katrina. And we met Bonnie and Anthony for the first time. It was the most awkward interaction because I didn't say anything. My mom was like, did all the talking and was all for it. But of course, like as great, like, she's looking for me to find my community and to find my place. But at the same time, her first question is like, oh, do you have students working here? And then we leave, and her first comment to me is like, Sarah, you can get a job there now. So it's her fault that I work at APAC. You're welcome. But yeah, that she definitely was like the first one to bring me in. But I definitely think it comes a lot from, I got more involved through APAC because I lived on an honors floor. I was not an honors student, but I lived on an honors floor my first year. There were probably like 60 kids on that floor, and only 3 Asian identifying students total, and that's much better than most of the other honors floors. From what I hear, that's like way more diversity than any of the other ones get. So we definitely flocked together. Like the 3 of us are still friends. Lily was one of them, and she's my roommate now and has been since our first year. And she's definitely the one that pulled me in because she's better at reading her mail. I don't remember getting that APAC letter, but I do have it somewhere still. So I didn't participate in anything until she pulled me into their first year student network, and that just got me more and more involved. and that definitely has influenced. I guess most of my closest friends are now through APAC, and they're definitely the people I enjoy hanging out with. I have friends through engineering and friends through engineering orgs, but it's just not the same when you go to a party and with a bunch of white electrical engineering boys, and you still get that question of like, oh, what are you? And it's like, okay, this is cool. So I definitely, it makes it a lot easier to develop close relationships with people when you have a mutual understanding of some of the things that you have to face and some of the things that are okay and not okay to say to people.
Well, I'm definitely glad that you are all here participating with APAC. It's a great time. And so our next question is, have you ever had experiences with people trying to guess what you're mixed with, or assume that you're mixed based on your appearance? How did you respond?
So one of like the biggest one that I can remember this happening was actually with my neighbor. And my friends and I were like hanging out. I live in like the middle of nowhere, so it's like mostly white. It's a lot of like farmland sort of thing. This guy, he wasn't white. I think he was I'm not sure what his identity was, but just know that it wasn't white. But he was just like, so what are you? And they started listing off all of the fucking Asian identities, and he was just like a Japanese, blah blah blah, like Chinese, like a Korean, and I just the entire time I was like pissed, like I was just annoyed out of my mind, and I was just like, no, 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 and like just wanted this dude to leave us alone. And then like when he finally did guess Filipino, I was just like, and then he was like, oh, Burmese pythons, and I'm just like, I'm gonna lose my fucking mind. Sorry for the language, but that was, and then like that was like the most annoying situation that happened to me. But I've definitely been asked this question a lot of just like, oh, like, are you a lot of times they do end up guessing that I am Filipino, but they don't really guess that I'm mixed. There was actually a really awkward encounter when I was at Target with my mom, and this Filipino woman came up to us and she was like, oh, like, are you Filipino? And then like my mom was like talking to them, and then she's just like, your daughter looks more Filipino than you, and my mom's full like Filipino, so she was just like, excuse me. Like what so it's definitely, it's whack. And then I feel like definitely when I'm hanging out with like my dad, it's people definitely know that I'm mixed, because like I don't look like him. Like I do have certain facial features, but people don't really pay attention to the details. They're just like, they're not white, and just go from there. But yeah, definitely experienced it, definitely hate it, still probably gonna keep happening, but gonna keep shutting it down.
For me, I've definitely had this a lot growing up. When I lived in California, I think kind of like similar to Katrina, whenever I was with my mom, they were always like, oh, where are you from? And because my mom is Thai, people always assume that she looks Filipino. I think wherever we went, the first assumption was always, oh, are you Filipino? You must be like a Filipino family. Oh, you two look like sisters. And it's like, what? So that was like that one like the main experience I had growing up in California. And then moving back to Thailand, I don't know why, but whenever you speak in another language, you have like another persona. So whenever people ask me, oh, like, is your family like from America? Are you half like white / like American? Not a thing. In Thai, I would respond politely because that's my Thai persona whenever I'm speaking Thai, and I just hate it. Like I can't be like, what are you talking about? Shut the, like, I can't say those things. I'm always like, oh yes. And then I remember one time I was just minding my own business breathing at CSU, and then this girl came up to me and she was just like, can I guess can I guess like what you are? Like let's play this game kind of thing. And it's like, you must be half Japanese. No. You must be half this, half that. And in my head, I was like, you will pick everything but Thai. And if you do pick Thai, you're gonna say Taiwanese. And so like I've also had that too of like, oh, like, can I guess what you are? And it's like, no, you can't. I'll tell you straight up, I am Thai. And then they were like, oh, like Taiwanese? No. Or sometimes just equating me to like Thai food, I guess. It's like, oh yeah, like I'm Thai. Or you must be Thai. I like really like Thai food and things like that. And it's like, I don't know why you're equating me to like my food. If not Thai food, it's always Taiwanese food. Like, I don't understand how you function at all. So that's been my experience with it. I think it's just like a mix of trying to like respond in different ways and like kind of like noticing how I do respond depending on where I am, the situation and things like that. But it's never a fun experience.
Yeah, I guess it's a kind of privilege for being one of the most well-known Asian countries for white people. From Katrina and Jayne's story, like for some reason people always guess first like Japan. They're like, "Are you Japanese?" And I guess it's something I didn't notice as much because people would always guess Japanese, and it's like, well, technically you're right. I guess thanks for doing that. I don't know how to feel about that, but people would always be like, "Oh, are you Japanese?" And it's like, well, yes, but I don't know. It's yeah, not something I noticed as much until I got older. When they do play the guessing game, oftentimes they get it right. And I know Jessica mentioned this when she was a panelist, but that's something I get like on Tinder a lot, where the first message I'll get, and weirdly enough, for the majority, it is from like Asian identifying or mixed Asian guys, where they'll be like, the first thing they say to me straight off the bat will be, "Are you Japanese?" And it's like, great conversation starter. I'm gonna delete this chat. Like, yeah. So I do get it a lot, but it's I don't know how I'm supposed to respond. Like, yes, I'm Japanese, but like, could you back off? Like, I don't know who you are, sort of thing. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing. And like, sorry, that experience with on Tinder kind of goes into our next question of, have you ever been fetishized because of your mixed identity?
So Jessica and Miguel and Carl, they're I think Carl was there for this try, the one on fetishization of APIDA women when I oh god. So yeah, I have been fetishized before, actually with like probably about a year ago, something like that. So Japanese guy, he called me because I was Filipino. Him and his roommate were both just like, "Oh, you're like a spicy Asian." And Vani, she's right here somewhere. She like, we both make fun about it. We both make fun of it now, but it was definitely just sort of like a, where did you even get that from? And like when they did try to explain it, I didn't go into like further depth in the other tribe, but when they did try to explain it, it's just like, oh, because you're like technically like Spanish Asians, and I'm just like, you're not helping the situation, buddy. Like, but other than that, I've definitely been fetishized for being mixed race. A lot of times people are like, oh, you're so exotic, or mixed babies are like the cutest, or like just stuff like that, especially on Tinder. Like people are just like, oh, you're so pretty because you're mixed and blah blah blah, or like also trying to guess that. So it's definitely apparent in that, and it's it's not great, but like obviously the best thing that I could do is just like shut it down when it's happening and then laugh about it later on. Yeah, I do now, but yeah, definitely have experienced that.
I've experienced being fetishized. Yes, I have some experiences. one thing I do relate this to is kind of like beauty standards, because in Thailand, like people always like to touch my skin because I'm so pale sometimes, and it's like, yes, genetically, yes, but also I never leave the house, so yes. Um, so it's always been like, oh, you have like such pretty skin, like you're so white and pale. Again, like that Asian standard beauty of white and being, I guess, like close to whiteness. So that has never been like a fun experience. It's like I can't do anything about it. Like I never leave the house. Like I don't know what you want me to do about my skin tone. And then the other experiences with fetishization, I've had someone tell me that we would make great mixed babies together. So that was pretty disgusting. I shut that down real quick. I was like, no, please don't ever say that ever again. And then another experience that I had was that this person went to Thailand to study abroad. And so when they found out that I was Thai, I think like a part of them was just like, yes, not in a sense of like let's connect, but I'm going to message you almost every day to try to get you onto a date. And later I found out that they have been pursuing a lot of other girls who were also Asian in a way, because their previous girlfriend was Asian, and so they had like this fetishizing thing going on with that. So it felt really nasty, and they would just try to use like my culture to get me to like go to places with them or have conversations with them. So it was just like really gross experience. Like even though I recognized that they may have like went to Thailand and probably like experienced it in some form, but it was just gross knowing that they were using that in some ways to get close to me. So yeah, not a good thing. No.
Yeah, so I once had a friend in high school say to me like, oh, I was about to meet his girlfriend or something, and he's like, yeah, my girlfriend doesn't like you. Don't worry about it. She just knows I'm into Asian chicks, so she's not gonna like you. And it was like, so that was messed up. But I definitely, oh God, I forgot what I was saying. I was still dwelling on this memory. uh, I also there's something I did mention during the fetishization chai too. There's definitely like a weird thing, something we somehow have managed to not touch on this entire mixed race panel so far is like the idea of like being enough, being Asian enough or being white enough or like never being enough. And I definitely, for me, like I am not fat by any means. But in comparison to like mainstream popular like Asian girls and beyond that, like the white expectation of Asian girls, like tiny and submissive and like China doll, something you can like throw around. I am not that. So I definitely feel like uh, in high school, especially, I struggled a lot more with like wanting to be, thinner with darker hair, because people would talk about like, oh, Asian girls are so pretty, but like I don't like fitting into that. I wasn't necessarily like the ideal of being like the Asian girl that guys go after, but also I'm not like blonde and blue-eyed, so what am I? Am I attractive, sort of thing. Obviously, I'm over that because I know I'm super hot now, but but yeah, it's definitely like a weird place to be like I'm beautiful and also not because I am Asian. It's just like a weird thing to I make your standard is only dating Asian girls, but yeah.
Thank you for sharing. And as a follow-up question, if you feel comfortable with sharing, how do you think this fetishization played in with your parents' relationships?
Yeah, so for that one, not entirely sure. before I would, because my dad is white, my mom is Asian, and she does, I guess, I would say like she would fit into that stereotype of like submissive, and he's very like super like more to the point, like aggressive sort of thing. So a lot of times I feel like a lot of people could perceive it as fetishization. I've never seen anything like that would indicate that it ever was. I just sort of like see my parents as just like a normal like married couple, like they argue and then they just like go and like do cute like stuff like drink coffee in the morning and watch the sunrise and stuff. As far as like how both of their different cultures have played into their marriage and eventually like into like my upbringing, they both did have a lot very different lifestyles. My mom values her family a lot more than my dad does. He personally cut himself off from his family, and even then, like his family is tiny compared to my mom's. So going into that, there was a little bit of conflict coming to play with that, as far as like he didn't really want to go to all the family events, and then my mom always did. Um, and then sometimes it would be like a argument sort of thing of like, why do you keep asking me if I want to go to this when he doesn't? But I feel like that wasn't necessarily like something I had to do with like race-based thing. I think it was more of just like different upbringings and different like family situations. But yeah, that's would say that's pretty much like all that I could say about that. I can't really like determine if it was like a fetishization thing or not, just because like obviously I'm not them, but it's my perspective.
I honestly don't really know. I think it's kind of hard thinking about my family in that way. So for me to like kind of like look at it through that perspective is really difficult. But I think growing up, there's been a lot of stereotypes within Thailand, just in general, of like middle-aged white men coming into Thailand and marrying someone who's younger or having kids with someone who's younger. And so I know in high school there was like a lot of that assumption of like, oh, your mom's probably a gold digger, or your dad's like this, or your dad's just like really into like younger Asian girls or things like that. So like that has been really hard growing up in high school to kind of like hear that from different folks who also have parents within that same situation, but I guess they don't see their parents that way, but they see other people's parents that way. So like that was just really hard growing up and having to like listen or hear that from other folks. And then with like, I think growing up within my like household, I feel like, I don't know, it's just really hard to tell. My mom's a very fiery person. She's so fiery, like I can't even deal with her sometimes because she's just that fiery. Definitely not submissive in any way, not at all. But I think because of that, like her fiery personality and my dad's more stubborn personality, there's been a lot of like cultural clashes growing up. Um, and it's like all these like family drama of how do we go about this when people value different things culturally and how to deal with things culturally. A lot of different views, lots of language barriers within that. But yeah, overall, like, yeah, it's something that I haven't really thought about and don't really want to think about, sadly to say, but I know like at some point by myself it's gonna have to be a reflection to be made. But yeah.
Yeah, I agree to a large degree that this is not something that I am comfortable thinking about, even, let alone talking about, because it's the relationship is practically the start of like Madame Butterfly with more colonizer thrown in. Because my dad went to Japan as a missionary. My mom was converted to the church, and then they got married, had a few kids, and now they're in America. So I don't know. It's like weird because like from the outside perspective, I guess, even from my perspective, sometimes it definitely seems very like that's the case. Is my dad, a large white man, went to Japan, found himself a tiny Asian wife, and now they have like the perfect American ideal of family, but with a cute little Asian woman. But at the same time, like, see, this is also, wow, I'm gonna talk about weird family dynamics, but like my dad is definitely more of a baby that likes to be taken care of. I say that in like years of resentment from high school coming through, but and my mom has always been a caretaker. I mean, I'm a caretaker, and that's where I get it from, is she raised me that way. So there's definitely a lot of that dynamic. But that being said, like I know my mom is a strong individual who, although is really good at like holding her tongue and taking shit from people, like if she cares about it, like she won't let people step all over her is a thing. Like she's a very strong woman, and definitely like my hero. So yeah, it's weird. It's a weird thing that I haven't fully processed yet or even discussed with them ever, nor do I think I will discuss it with my father, maybe my mother, but he's very white Republican. So yeah, it's a weird thing in my life. We just ignore it.
So our next question regarding family and relationships is every relationship you've ever had an interracial relationship, including with your family? And how has this impacted relationships like throughout your life?
So I guess like just to like clarify, just like talking about like romantic relationships or talking about can you specify a little bit?
As Carl said in the chat, yes. So romantic and familial and
Okay.
friendship, so relationships in general.
Okay. Yeah, that's an interesting question, because I remember in high school my first boyfriend was white, but we were both German, so we were like half the same identity, and then obviously like German American, not like straight from Germany, even though his mom immigrated over here, and then I think it was my dad's grandparents that immigrated over here. Yeah. Um, but I guess I would consider it interracial, mainly because a lot of people, including my mom, were just like, oh, because you guys would have such cute kids because it would be mixed and it would be so pretty just like you. And I was just like, I don't even want kids. Like, especially not with this one. Like, are you kidding? Like, I'm 16. Like, God. And then I would say, like, I'm just gonna be point blank about it. Like, that relationship ruined like dating white people for me. So I haven't since, and I don't think I've ever since then dated anyone who had like the same like racial identity as me, which definitely has like upsides and downsides as far as like learning about each other. Like especially with Vani, who's like, you can't see her, she's the background, but it's definitely like been a lot of like learning experiences. I feel like also just the fact that I am half white, and with that comes like a lot of privilege, especially because my dad is an electrical engineer and he makes a lot of money. So it's like there's definitely some aspects of like privilege that like came into our relationship that like we had to talk about, and it's definitely something that I'm still like working through and acknowledging. But I would say like as far as impacting relationships, it's definitely had like pros and cons. Like there's a lot more explaining of like, hey, so this is how my family works. Like it's not like all one like jumble of like Yeah, my Filipino parents are, yeah, my white parents. It's like my dad's white, my mom's Filipino. Like you're gonna get a mix of different perspectives and different like parenting styles, I would say. And like with that, there's like Bonnie and I actually talk about this a lot. My like everyone loves my mom, but my dad is definitely someone that you have to get used to. He's very scary at first, and like you can kind of tell if he doesn't like someone because he just won't talk to them. And like whenever my mom tries to bring them up, he's just like, "No, I don't want to talk about it." But a really big thing for like us, I guess, is like he actually asked about Bonnie a lot, and he talks to her a lot. I feel like it's because she's also an electrical engineer, so he gets really excited, and he's hated everyone I've dated prior to this, so he's really happy. But he's a very like, once you get used to it, get used to him. He's a very like odd oddball. He's like an anarchist, has a lot of conspiracy theories. It's fun. But as far as like relationships with like family, just because a lot of people on my mom's side are mixed race, like my generation, it's definitely not something that's like super like frowned upon or like nothing that's ever been like an issue. It's more of just like the, oh, you're so pretty and you look like your dad, like you're so tall, blah blah blah. And it's never really something that I saw as like a negative thing. Then with friends, I've had a lot of like mixed race friends, actually mixed Filipino in high school. I don't know how we all managed to go to the same tiny charter school. That was kind of cool. um, but I would definitely say that there's a lot more of like, when it comes to people that had my identity as like Filipino or even mixed, there's a lot of like bonding time of just like, oh yeah, like talking about like our experiences growing up and stuff like that. So I would say overall, like like my parents having an interracial relationship and me being mixed race have definitely was like added to the conversation, added to like experiences and growing with people that are important in my life.
I think every relationship that I had so far has always been interracial in some ways. Um, Growing up in the United States, I've always been just like that one Thai friend, and everyone else was some other like APIDA identity, some other type of some other race. Yeah, sorry, losing like my wording. So they've always been very different from me. And then within family, my brother and I are the only people within like our whole family, like combined, both my mom and my dad's, that are interracial. We have two cousins before us who were mixed Chinese and white, but I mean they're a lot older than us, so we never really got to see them as we were growing up, also because we were living in another country. And then like romantic relationship wise, everyone I have dated has always been mixed Asian something. And I think that's usually because of the environment I grew up in, because there's a lot of mixed students or mixed kids in my school. It's like a hot spot for like mixed folks. And I feel like growing up, I think like that's always been the norm for me, of having mix, or like being in friendships or having like romantic relationships with people who are mixed. Um, and then I think with friends, I think I've had various relationships with different people as friends. And I really kind of like think growing up in like a very, what I used to call like a very international space, having friends who are mixed race, but also from different countries, who identify in different ways. So I feel like that was like a really good and lucky experience for me going forward, and being more open to having relationships with people from different backgrounds. Um, I had a thought, but I lost it. So yeah, everyone in my relationships have been pretty much like different from me, in a good way. And I think growing up in this household, I kind of see that clash of like, not really, if you don't understand each other's or your partner's cultures, in a way it could lead to like a lot of different issues, a lot of different values, lots of clashing and things like that. And so I kind of like tend to like want to avoid that in some ways. So definitely straying away from white folks, not dealing with that. But just looking into like, I think how open-minded that person is within the relationship and how we can get along and understand each other's cultures better has always been kind of like my mindset when forming relationships with folks.
So like beyond romantic relationships, to start with, a lot of what like makes me made my childhood me like so proud to be mixed race, Japanese, white, or like proud of who I am and comfortable with who I am is the fact that I have 3 siblings and we're all like the same exact, not the same exact person. We all look the exact same, and we get along really well. And I think that is because of how we grew up. It's no matter where we've been, if it is, you know, weird situations where like we're in Japan and we're seen only as white, or people constantly commenting on how we're Asian, we've always had each other. It has always been us. And then everyone else, even when like I think in our extended family from both sides, I think we're the only multiracial like subset. Everybody on my dad's side is all white, and everyone on my mom's side is all Japanese. So even family events, you know, we've always had each other. And that was like another weird thing for me is like when I'm talking about my cousins, I have my dad's side of the family, so my white cousins and my Japanese families, Japanese cousins. But when my dad's cousins talk about me, we're the Japanese cousins, which is another weird like thing for me to think about. It's like I view my Japanese cousins as the cousins who live in Japan, but we're the Japanese cousins because we're mixed race Japanese white. But so that's definitely, you know, it's made it something that I haven't had to, something that wasn't as difficult for me because I haven't had to face it alone. I've always had my siblings. But like as far as romantic relationships, I guess this would have been something I totally forgot about that would have been good to mention in the fetishization thing. But like I haven't dated white men before, and I've gone on dates with people. The weirdest one I've ever gone on, it was a date, so as to get to know each other. And like one of the first things he said to me was that he was a Japanophile, and then talked about that for practically the rest of the day. So I think the moral of the story is that I don't long-term date people who fetishize Asian culture at all because it really weirds me out. So we have one date and then none ever again. But my current relationship is technically not interracial because my partner is also mixed race, Japanese and white. So we have a lot of similarities there. However, his father is mixed race and his mother is white. So he identifies less as mixed race and less as Japanese as he does white. And I think that's mostly just because of how people perceive him. And again, that whole idea of like not feeling Asian enough to identify as Asian. So he's not as comfortable talking about it, but we definitely, you know, he's still, especially when it comes to a lot of those like insecurities and things like that, we can have deeper discussions about like the similarities and what we like our experiences and what we feel from that, and how it was growing up with a white parent and one who does identify as more Asian. So yeah. It's definitely easier to connect with someone when they have shared experiences.
Thank you all for sharing. And this kind of pushes us into our next question again. Do you feel as though you do not belong to any particular group, or that you have to choose one over the other? What would enoughness look like to you, and how have you conquered this idea?
Yeah, so this is something I've been kind of like battling with since the beginning, I guess. I always, whenever I felt like I identified more Asian, I was told like, oh, you act more white. And then whenever I identified more white, which was honestly when I was really little, still don't really know why, people are like, oh no, you're Asian, you're not German. I'm just like, but I live, my dad, hi. But it's definitely like, I don't think I'll ever feel enough for either group. And I think like the overall goal is to stop trying to feel enough for either group. And I feel like the goal is to just be like, I'm mixed race, that's what I am. And I don't have to be enough for one group or the other, because in the end, I'm not one group or the other. I'm both of them. So I think enoughness for me would just look like enough for myself, not necessarily the other identities.
I think right now my stubbornness has led me to feel like I belong within the Thai group more than I do within that white group, honestly. And I feel I really have been embracing that Thai side of me, and have really just been focused on that culture and that group and that identity a lot more. Knowing that yes, like a part of me is white, a part of me is Western in some ways, speaking English, doing all these things, but really I feel as if I am Thai. And even though people don't perceive me that way, like I know who I am more than other people do. And so being in America, it's like, you don't really seem like you're like one of us, I guess. Like you're more of just like either a foreigner or you're just more Asian. And then being in Thailand is like, oh, like you look really white. You must be white. Oh, I'm surprised you can actually speak Thai. So it's like I think I'm in a place where I really don't care what other people think, and really kind of like know myself a lot better now. And so that enoughness for me is just being what I am and knowing where I belong and how comfortable I am, and really just knowing myself more better than other people.
I definitely agree that it does come more from like what you're comfortable with than trying to make other people comfortable with you. And for me, part of that does come from like that hyphen of like Asian American, Japanese American, like not one or the other, and recognizing that I am not Japanese, I'm not American, I am a mixture, a mixed race. And that means different things, even for other mixed race people, but that means completely different things from being Japanese or American. And part of that does come from even from my siblings, yes, and even from similar but different experiences of like the mixed race or just in general Asian American people that I do know, especially through APAC, those relationships I build. I don't have to be worried about like validating myself or my knowledge of one or the other, because I'm not fully Japanese, so I don't know what that full experience is, and I've never been fully white, so I don't know what that experience is either. And my other Asian American friends understand that, so it's great that to have that support group, to have those people in my life. But again, a lot of it is like more with that personal, like I don't have to fight to be one or the other, because I am in this totally different group of Asian American.
Thank you all. Unfortunately, we have time for only one more question. And to close off this session, our last question is, what makes you proud to hold your identity or to be a part of the APIDA umbrella?
I would say what makes me proud of my identity really is my parents. obviously, like, I'm super proud of how far my mom has come, like, from moving to the US at 5 years old with her siblings and her parents, and then having to learn English from Sesame Street all the way to, and then jumping to learning Spanish. So now she's trilingual from her best friend in high school, and then getting a biology degree, and then moving so far. And then kind of like she really did like succeed before she met my dad, which was really cool. Um, and I would just say like a lot of my pride does come from my parents, because even though my dad is white, he does have a lot of that privilege and a lot of the like baggage that comes with that, especially um, because of like that interracial relationship. I'm really proud of how he owns up to it, and how he's not super outspoken, but like when I do talk to him about it, he's very like defensive of my mom, of like if anyone's like starting to like question her, or like think that she's like, oh, like your wife is just so like submissive and quiet, he's just like, no, she's not, and like really like backs her up. I'm really proud of how he takes that privilege that he has of being well off and white, and just like throws it back and says, screw you guys. um but I would say like I'm really proud of how I got like the really like like not submissive, but like empathetic and like caring side of my mom, but also the sort of like resilience that my dad has. Really that both of them have. But I'm just like, I'm really proud to have like two different cultures, because it's definitely two different eye openings for me, which is really cool.
I'm just really proud and grateful for my life experiences, being APIDA and mixed race. I feel like a lot of that has really shaped me into the person that I am and who I want to be, how I am, and really just like I think there's like just a lot of things that I'm super proud of and that I can be proud of. Like I don't know if I can name it all, but I think I definitely agree with Katrina on like being proud of my family. I think through all like the difficulties that we went through in terms of many different things, I think I'm just really proud of my mom in general, of having to deal with that. Growing up in Thailand, didn't know that she would end up having a child with a professor. Basically, she was not a student. She just to clarify, she was not a student. She worked in a restaurant. um, but for my mom, especially coming from like a village in Thailand, having to leave high school and then coming to Bangkok, which is such a big city, and having to find work there, and just really like trying to like make a living for herself, and then having children that she really loves. So um, but then also my dad, I think he has a very interesting life experience, being in the military, being in the Air Force, and then just like basically traveling all over the world, something that I really want to do, and having that experience and then deciding to stay in Thailand. So like I think that's something that I'm really grateful for, because if not, I wouldn't be here. So I think with all of that, my life experiences just growing up, going into international school, having that privilege of going there in Thailand, being able to speak two languages, being able to navigate cultures, and having like an open mind when I think interacting with other folks, and just having that space to connect with different people. So really like I'm really thankful for that, more than proud to say. But yeah, both proud, thankful, and grateful for all of those things, because it really kind of like shaped me into the person who I am. And I think what I want people to kind of like take away from this, as someone who's mixed race, is really, I don't know, I feel like there's never enough is how you kind of like define it for yourself when it comes to being a PETA. So I think just finding whatever makes you proud, even if it's like the littlest things, I think that's really important for folks. I think for me too. I'm just really bad at expressing these types of things. Bear with me. So yeah, I think just really finding that for yourself, kind of like what I said earlier to the last question, really just like, you know who you are and you know what enough is for you more than other folks do. So don't try to let other people define you based on what they think or what they've seen from the media, or what ideals or perceptions that they have about you, because honestly, like, no one knows you better than you. So
Yeah, I'm really proud of like the mix of cultures that I am. And yeah, I love the some of it has to do just with my mom. Some of it has to do with her growing up in Japan. A lot of the skills and characteristics and life talents that she taught me just by raising me. And I'm extremely grateful to both my parents for putting in the hard work to live in this country. It was difficult for them to make the move here, and they struggled at first when they did move to Colorado, just especially with 3 kids and another one on the way, just to make a stable life for all of us. But they are incredibly supportive and helpful people, and they put in a lot of work. And being in this country means that I can have conversations like this. This is that I can be more conscious about my identity and conscious of my own mental health and mental space. It's just not something that would have been as possible back in Japan. So I do appreciate the sacrifices that they made to raise us here. And then yeah, I guess I'm personally proud of the choices that I've made to like be present in APAC and learn more about APIDA identities and experiences, because I think that's the big takeaway for me, that I want people to know is like, yes, it you are made up of the people who got you here, like that does help shape who you are, but I think a lot of identity can be the decisions that you make for yourself as well, and like who you decide to be.
Thank you all for sharing. So unfortunately, we are out of time, and this concludes our Try to Understand session for today and for the year. We look forward to having Chai with you next year. We also have a survey that we'd like you to fill out. The link is in the chat. And I just want to thank you all very much for participating and being a part of Try to Understand with APAC. It's been a great year, so thank you very much. The chat will remain open if anybody would like to continue discussing. And I will now end